They didn't just burn my firewood, they burned my lifeline. Out here, in the kind of Montana winter where one wrong move can get you killed, I watched everything I'd worked for, months of sweat, prepping for the cold, go up in smoke because the HOA decided it looked unsightly. No warning, no apology, just ash. I remember standing there, clutching my daughter's hand as she shivered in the living room, the house growing colder by the hour. They called it a violation. I called it what it was, sabotage. When they told me to keep quiet, play by their rules, I walked down to the hatch my grandfather built before any of them ever heard the word covenant. And I opened the spillway, because sometimes the only language people understand is consequence. Winter in this pocket of Montana, it doesn't roll in gentle. It invades. No warning, no mercy. By October, you can smell the iron in the air, the pine needles frozen in mid-fall. Cold out here, it doesn't sneak up on you. It punches right through, all the way to your bones, until you start wondering if your thoughts are about to shatter. And I'll tell you, the mountains don't give a damn how many tours you did, or what medals are pinned on your chest. When the temp drops, every man's just meat trying not to freeze. I learned that long before I bought this land, came home with a battered discharge and a daughter who needed peace, somewhere the sky didn't explode every night. I found it in a valley a half-hour outside Helena. Just a wedge of land, pressed against a ridge so steep the sun gives up by 3 o'clock come December. The cabin was old, honest, built by folks who figure a man ought to see the weather coming. The deed, that was even older, 1957, had a clause no one cared about for 3 generations. Full ownership, full rights to the emergency spillway, and that gate feeding the reservoir above. My grandfather poured the concrete himself. I remember running my thumb across his name, scratched into the mix, the day the realtor handed me the keys. It settled something inside me I hadn't felt since Kandahar. I started preparing the way some guys plant gardens. It was still hot when I fired up the chainsaw, dropped the first stand of birch, that smell of sap and two-stroke oil clinging to everything. By the end of August, I had 4 cords stacked up along the fence. I built the shed myself. Heavy roof, backup propane tank, and a steel cage I welded with my own hands. Mouse-proof, bear-proof, idiot-proof. Can good stack like ammo. Anything that would keep through 5 winters and still feed a growing girl. 50-pound sacks of rice, flour, oats, coffee. When the grid failed, and it always failed, we wouldn't be those people scraping wallpaper for calories. Neighbors watched through their triple-pane windows and pretended not to. Most moved here for the view, the covenants, the illusion that nothing unexpected ever happens. They paid others to plow their drives, kept their heat pumps going by faith alone. Some waved as I hauled logs. Most didn't. And then there was the HOA. First time Karen Stratton pulled up, white Escalade, license plate Ridge 1. She lowered the window, smile sharp as a razor. Mr. Harland, several residents are concerned about the volume of your outdoor storage. I leaned the splitting maul on the block, wiped sawdust off my arms. It's firewood, ma'am. It keeps my daughter from turning into an icicle when the lines snap, which they do every winter. Her smile didn't budge, but her eyes tightened. It simply exceeds the allowances in our visual harmony standards, Section 4C. Section 4C didn't exist. I checked. She tried to play it off, said they were updating the language. Left a formal notice. 3 days later, there's a second one taped to my door, then a third, now with color photos, red circles drawn like sniper scopes around my shed, my wood, my propane cage. Failure to comply will result in fines, forced removal. I took photos, kept records, kept stacking. Because winter was coming, and out here, winter doesn't care about your bylaws. Winter only respects those who prepare. The first real snow came the night Maggie turned 16. It started as a whisper, ended with the world smothered silent. By morning, county plow hadn't come close to our road. HOA's contractor did the lower cul-de-sac, but left us buried. I chained up the old Ford, carved my own way out. When I got back, another envelope waited under the wiper. Violation. Immediate removal. Fines started stacking. $75, $150, $275. All from a generic HOA address, but always with Karen's signature, like a royal seal. By the end of that week, it was over $600 and climbing. One morning, Maggie sat at the table, staring at another letter. "Daddy, can they make us leave?" I told her the truth. They can make noise, they can make paperwork, but they can't make us leave. This house is ours, paid for in blood and years. She nodded, but she looked older than 16 in that moment. That night, the temp dropped to -12. I stayed up, cleaning my grandfather's old Remington. Around 2 in the morning, the motion sensor pinged. I pulled on boots, stepped out into air, so cold it felt like knives. The cameras showed nothing, probably just a martin, but I stood out there, staring at my fortress with steel light, and felt something harden inside me. They weren't just harassing me. They were threatening the only thing I had left, keeping my kid alive. The hearing was set for Wednesday. I shaved for the first time in 10 days, pressed my old dress blues, pinned the medals on, not for pride, but for the look it gives civilians. Maggie watched me in the mirror. "You look like you're headed to court-martial, Dad." Same difference. We drove through the snow to the community center. Karen sat at the head of the table, flanked by the treasurer and the landscaping chair. Everything about the room screamed authority that's never been tested. I didn't sit. I laid out my binder, photos, bylaws, the HOA's own brochure showing a huge woodpile as rustic Montana charm. When I wanted to sell lots, it was charming. When I lived here, it was a violation. Karen offered a compromise. Keep half my wood if I built an HOA-approved fence around it, paid a $250 impact fee. I looked her dead in the eye. "Go to hell, Karen." I left. The air outside felt cleaner. On the way to the truck, a woman stopped me by the dumpsters. "You're not the only one," she whispered. She'd been fined $600 for painting her porch the wrong color, same paint Karen used on her own house. I handed her my card. "Document everything. You're going to need a trail." She vanished, but that spark, that feeling I wasn't alone, that was new. 2 nights after the hearing, the cold dove even lower. The stove barely kept up. I heard a sound outside. The shed camera was black. I ran out and saw the door cracked open. First came the smell, then the glow. Flames roared out. Propane tank exploded, sent a blast of heat that nearly knocked me flat. By the time the fire crew showed, everything I'd built was charcoal. The chief pointed out the burn pattern. Gas can pour, camera lens sprayed with paint. Someone meant for this to happen. I found 2 figures on the porch camera, hoodie, gloves, a red gas can. Not enough for an arrest, enough for a war. My friend Ben, a lawyer in Bozeman, told me, "They want you to snap. Don't give them the headline. Document. Wait." But I'd lost 6 months' work in winter with my daughter asleep a stone's throw away. I spent that night staring at my grandfather's maps, tracing the line of the spillway, the channel nobody in Phase 3 wanted to remember. And now the weather was shifting, 3 feet of snow, then a warm front. It was pressure, and pressure needs an outlet. The storm hit, 3 feet in 72 hours. Power out. House at 41 degrees and falling. Maggie got sick, fever, cough that turned ugly. I called the county. They wouldn't send help. Private HOA road maintenance. They couldn't get in. Maggie said, "Then we don't need their gates." I smiled for the first time in a week. At 11:43 a.m., I kissed her forehead and stepped out into the storm. I waded through snow to the spillway hatch, key cold in my hand, turned the wheel just enough to wake the gears. Then I locked it up, marked the spot, hiked home through wind and silence. Downhill, the lower development was having a party, generators, lights, catered food. Karen's people were warm, for now. But they weren't ready for what was coming. When the warm front hit, the snow turned to rivers. I hiked up to the dam, turned the spillway open, not sabotage, just maintenance, just gravity doing what gravity does. Down in phase 3, it started as a trickle. Then it built, slow, relentless, water going exactly where the county maps always said it would. Lawns flooded, basements filled, insurance voided, panic setting in one house at a time. Karen came outside in slippers, yelling into her phone as water rose around her. I watched it all from the ridge, not vengeance, just physics. Sheriff's deputies showed up. The news chopper circled. By the end of the day, the HOA sent out an emergency text to everyone, except me. Unexpected overflow event. Investigation underway. I laughed, really laughed, for the first time since the fire. The flood only got a few feet deep. Not biblical, but enough. Enough to wipe away a whole season of their arrogance. In the days that followed, the county condemned Phase 3. Bulldozers tore down the houses. The HOA dissolved. Karen disappeared. Rumors said Arizona under her maiden name. My neighbors, the ones who hadn't spoken to me in years, showed up with chainsaws to help build a new shed. Maggie painted the sign herself, Outpost. If you can see it, it's here to keep us alive. One afternoon, a county truck pulled up, and they welded a new seal over the spillway, handed me a plaque, in grateful recognition of responsible management. The valley was ours again. Forgiveness isn't a speech, it's a quiet nod, a hand with the next log. And when winter came back around, we were ready. For cord stacked, chickens in the yard, neighbors stopping by. Not everyone apologized, but that's not the point. The land remembered what it was for. So did I. And some nights I sit on the porch with my daughter, and I realize victory isn't about getting rid of enemies. It's about finally being seen, about surviving together. Winter's still winter. But we're warm, we're ready. And when the cold tries the door again, it'll find us with a house full of light, a shed full of wood, and not a single person left asking permission just to survive. Now, let me ask you this. When the rules get weaponized against you, when powers used to keep people cold, where's the line? What would you do if your own lifeline was set on fire? Drop a comment below. Tell me, is there such a thing as going too far for justice? Or is there a time when the mountain gets the last word? And if you've ever had to fight for the simple right to keep your family warm, well, I'm listening.